Hi there folks, welcome back to Rich Reviews. Let's get today's film. The film is called David Lynch, The Art Life. This made over 165 grand in 8 theaters here. Wynn here had a 2007 documentary about Lynch. At the time it was making Inland Empire. This, I think, it was filmed over like a course of 3 or 5 years. You have Lynch most of the time in his art studio in the Hollywood Hills. Going into this film thinking to yourself, okay, this might be similar to De Palma, the film that came out like last year, how De Palma primarily talked about his films. This is not that film here, folks. David Lynch, The Art Life talks about largely is about David Lynch's early life and some weirdness that went on in his early life and his dealings with the art world at the current time. The fact, and his early dealings of trying to get Eraserhead made. Grew up during the baby boomer generation, and he was born in Montana, moved to Boise, Idaho, then moved to Spokane, Washington, and basically, he viewed his childhood as a normal, typical childhood, although, again, this is David Lynch we're talking about. His parents gave him a tremendous amount of freedom of whatever he wanted to do, although he came into conflict with his father later in his life about that. He said he never saw them fight together at all. His mother was a regular churchgoer, although she never overdid it with religion in their household. But he does recall some really weird incidences from his childhood. One including a naked woman bleeding from the mouth that comes up to him on his driveway while he's playing on his driveway. A lot of people will assume, okay, that's from Blue Velvet there. And at one point during his childhood, he went to a new school, and at that very day, a hurricane came through. He did like acid, I think he did, or some LSD. Got in his car, and at one point someone said, David, 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 repeatedly, and he was saying, what? And he finally figured out that he stopped in the middle of the highway. Which is like, yeah, I wouldn't want to do acid or any LSD and stop in the middle of a highway, which I think, wow, that's just bizarre. Again, art was his salvation later on in life because he fell into a bad crowd. His mother was disappointed that he fell into this bad crowd. His mother has some really specific words to describe her disappointment in him that he fell into this bad crowd. Of course, eventually, David Lynch moved to Alexandria, Virginia. His father, I guess, had a job there. And apparently, his father walked to work in, I guess, one of those gallon type hats. This obviously embarrassed David Lynch. But now looking back on it, he says, wow, my dad walked to work in a cowboy hat, and he didn't take the car or take the bus or take the subway to work. And again, art was his sort of salvation. He did briefly go to the University of Pennsylvania Fine Arts. Now, of course, at one point when he was in college, his father dropped him off. He basically sat in his room listening to the radio for days on end and not leaving his room. Now, of course, at one point he wanted to go to Europe to study art with his friend. He wanted to go for 3 years, but eventually he found himself back within 15 days, which is like most people go on vacation to Europe for at least 2 weeks. He wanted to stay up past 11. His father had some choice words about that, and his only one, his art mentor or some art guy who was reasonably famous at the time, told his father, hey, look, this is what your son is doing. And his father sort of figured out, okay. Now, at one point, his father came to visit him. He was living with his girlfriend at the time, and he asked his girlfriend to leave. Now, of course, he went down in the basement with his father. He wanted to show his father his collection of dead things, basically enough. So when he's coming up the stairs, he turns to David and basically says to him, I really hope you don't have children, which is like, yes, considering that you just shown your father a bunch of dead things, you can understand why, you necessarily wouldn't want to have progeny over after that. Specifically, Mr. Lynch didn't realize at the time that his girlfriend was actually pregnant, and so basically, yes, he was going to be a father regardless. And of course, towards the end of this film, we get to see the early footage of Eraserhead, which he got from the AFI conservatory ship, and how it took him several years to really shape that film. He was always running out of money to get that film made. If you're not a David Lynch fan and you're going into this thing cold, you might be thinking to yourself afterwards, thinking, okay, this is one of the most bizarre dudes I've ever seen. When it comes to the Lynch filmography. I've only seen parts of The Elephant Man, and I've seen Mulholland Drive. I have not seen the original Twin Peaks, nor have I seen the sequel series, the revival of Twin Peaks. Again, I probably should be doing that right about now. You know, again, he clearly appreciates art for what it's worth. So in the end, folks, David Lynch, The Art Life is a very fascinating documentary. If you're a David Lynch fan, you might be really engrossed by this. If you're not, again, you'll come away with it as what you will. So what I'm going to do here, folks, is I'm going to give David Lynch, The Art of Life, a matinee rating, because yes, there are some months where it's like, this is just too bizarre for words. Again, if you want to check this film out, go ahead. So folks, what do you think about David Lynch, The Art Life? Did you happen to like this film? Did you not care for it at all? What's your favorite David Lynch film? I have yet to see Dune. I probably should see Dune. As always, folks, like, comment, subscribe, and rid yourself of knowledge. I'll see you next time, folks.